thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jeff Ludwig, your Director of Education at the Seward House Museum. We're so pleased you come to the July installment of our Lunchtime Lecture Series. We are welcoming back I won't say a very old friend, but a longtime friend of the Seward House Museum. There's also some celebrities to be spotted in our crowd today. My predecessor, John Kingsley, is here, who was Director of Education before me. And we had a 3-week overlap in July and August of 2015, and I remember very vividly coming down the servant stairs with John, and he said, I have to introduce you to somebody. He's been introducing me to a lot of people during these days. And he said her name's Alyssa. She's been a teen volunteer for several years now, and she's about to go off to Susquehanna. So I came downstairs, and there she was with her grandparents, and she stuck her hand out. We had a Civil War encampment. And little did I know I'd be seeing so much of her. My grandmother said to me, she's thinking about majoring in history. Is that a good idea? And I said, yes. And 11 years later, I hope that answer was right, as she's gone through Susquehanna and Oneonta, a master's degree at James Madison. Alyssa was a teen volunteer, an intern, and she worked here full-time on staff for 3
years.
As our, not our education outreach coordinator, our administrative and visitor engagement coordinator, AVEC.
AVEC.
The acronym. She was our AVEC. Made the gift shop run, but also a great tour guide, haunted history, and we talked Seward and Fanny and everything nonstop. We were so proud when she got this job at Montpelier, where she's been now for 9 months studying James Madison's legacy as manager of visitor services there. But she's here today not in that capacity, but as a great historian, a scholar, and someone who's going to make a connection for us here at America 250. I don't want to spoil too much, but last year, as many of you may know, Walker and I spent a lot of time on the Erie Canal. We had a whole canal summer about it.
No cheer?
No cheer.
Woo!
When William Seward was a wee undergraduate, 15, 16, 17 years old at Union College, he wrote his father a letter and complained about how difficult it was for him to be a Madisonian, a disciple of James Madison, then the president, at this college that was just in love with DeWitt Clinton. But what did that mean to William Seward, and how did this self-described Madisonian become the William Seward we know today, who would perhaps reject much that was inherent in what he assumed was the ideological legacy of James Madison? You don't maybe answer that question, but for sure, give us an amazing program, is our long-time but not old friend. Welcome back, Alyssa. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Hello. As Jeff said, my name is Alyssa. I've been a bad penny and a reoccurring face at the Seward House since I was 16 years old, thanks to John Kingsley, like Jeff said. So really, if anybody has any issues, we can file a complaint with John. So like Jeff said, I'm currently working at Montpelier, which is James Madison's plantation. It is the place he grew up, and it is the place he also died. So I'm going to give you a little bit of some information about James Madison and who he was, and then we'll make some connections about who he was influenced who Seward became. So I entitled my presentation, The Great Little Madison, Seward. Great Little Madison is a quote that was actually from Madison's wife, Dolly. Dolly Payne Todd described him as the Great Little Madison. I like to joke that he was her 3 S's in type: small, sickly, and smart. And 2 of those S's definitely applied to William Seward, and I'd say that those were small and smart. So a lot of similarities there, but Great Little Madison, Seward and his Madisonian roots. This is the picture I was talking about, Walker. So if you go to Montpelier and you'd like to take a picture in one of the photo booths there, you can take your picture with sunglass James Madison if you would like. But just to start the presentation, just to go over in itself, who was James Madison, right? Well, James Madison Jr., believe it or not, was born to James Madison Sr. and Eleanor Conway Madison, or she was known as Nellie, in modern-day Montpelier Station, Virginia. He was born March 16th, 1751. The land that he was born on was originally settled by his grandfather, Ambrose Madison. He was the one who first set up the planter's cottage that James would later be born in. By the age of 11, he had already been educated by his mother. Nellie was someone who very much prioritized the education of her children. He was originally one of 12, but unfortunately only 7 of them made it to adulthood. So Nellie prioritized all of her children's education, but James, or Jemmy, his friends called him Jemmy, was the one who really took to the education the most. He was very much like Seward in the way that you could put a book in front of him and he would inhale the material instantly. By the age of 11, he was smarter than his mother could handle, so he was sent to boarding school where he was educated under a man named Donald Robinson, and where he began his broad education and learned his first 3 languages. Madison was fluent in 6 or 7 languages, and the first 3 he picked up were French, German, and Latin. Those are the ones he picked up under Donald Robinson. So by the age of 16, he had officially graduated from under Donald Robinson's tutelage and enrolled in the College of New Jersey, which is now known as Yale. So it was originally, he studied under Reverend John Witherspoon. John Witherspoon, the name might sound familiar for any of you who are revolutionary historians or anyone interested in the Revolutionary War. He was a delegate from New Jersey and signed the Declaration of Independence. He was very much a student of the Scottish Enlightenment, and that is where Madison got his interest in the Scottish Enlightenment as well. That Enlightenment was very much focused on logic, grounding, and just the everyday human experience, as opposed to more of a lofty philosophical kind of, your big thinkers. And this is where he was first introduced to the idea that people were born with unalienable rights. This is where he was introduced to it in the Scottish Enlightenment. And then we see that language later reflected both in the Declaration of Independence and later in the Constitution. James Madison didn't have anything to do with the Declaration of Independence. He was still in Virginia, working in their Congress at the time. He didn't go up to Philadelphia until it was time for the Constitutional Convention. So it was also during his time under John Witherspoon where he really gained the idea and appreciation for religious freedom. In Virginia during James Madison's time, in order to be able to preach, you had to have a license. He was very disturbed at one point about how some Baptist ministers in Virginia were attempting to preach. They were just having conversations, and those Baptist ministers were arrested because they were not members of the Anglican Church and did not have the appropriate permit to be preaching and having conversations with people on the street. This deeply disturbed Madison, so it became a highlight of his career to emphasize religious freedom. He himself was not necessarily a religious individual. We don't have any evidence of him strictly being Anglican or Presbyterian or anything like that. He was respectful of all faiths, all religions. One of the things that he kept in his home in Montpelier is there's a painting, it's really interesting. On opposing sides of one room, there is a painting of Pan and his nymphs, and on the other side, there is a version of the Last Supper. So he has those opposing religious viewpoints on either side of the room in order to spark the conversation and also to encourage people to say, it's okay to whatever you believe, you have the right to do that, and I will fight for you to have the right to do that. So Madison, overall, his political career was quite vast. He was hailed as the father of the Constitution. He was Secretary of State under President Jefferson, and then was subsequently the 4th President of the United States. Now, of course, because Mr. Madison was a Virginian, something that's important to talk about is his views on slavery. James Madison was born into a slave-holding family. The Montpelier was a completely self-sustaining and functioning plantation. Nobody had to leave. They had a carriage manufacturer on site. It's really, really interesting. So, unfortunately, throughout the span of his life, Madison did not free any of the enslaved individuals that were at Montpelier, despite how loud and vocal he was against the institution of slavery to begin with. He was not a fan. He and Jefferson very much aligned under that umbrella of we're not fans of slavery, but unfortunately we're not really going to do anything about it. Jefferson and Madison were very good friends. They spent a lot of time together. If you look at Montpelier and Monticello both, there are a lot of structural similarities, as Jefferson was kind of a chirping bird in Madison's ear the entire time that the final architectural updates to Montpelier were being made. Montpelier was, the actual house itself went through many different iterations by the time Madison retired there after his presidency. And of course, by that time, he was good friends with Thomas Jefferson. So of course, Jefferson had to have his opinions in there. Madison was an early and prominent member of the American Colonization Society, which encouraged the relocation of formerly enslaved individuals back to Africa, specifically to the country Liberia. He was, like I said, he was an abolitionist. He did not believe in slavery, even though he perpetuated it. He tried very, very hard to get the American Colonization Society to take bigger roots and actually get some people over to Liberia, but he faced a lot of backlash. Someone else who really took to the American Colonization Society's beliefs is Abraham Lincoln. He was someone who very much encouraged, didn't want slavery, but also thought, unfortunately, that formerly enslaved individuals could not integrate properly into American society. So he encouraged the back to Africa. And here in the house, the wonderful Seward House Museum, we do have the first two presidents of Liberia on the walls of the Diplomatic Gallery, Stephen Allen Benson and Joseph Jenkins Roberts. So Seward, once again, another Seward tie. So something that I absolutely love that Seward has a connection with Madison is the dining room diplomacy. Now, Madison never called it dining room diplomacy, but himself and Dolly are really the ones who started this sitting everybody down at a dining table and just having conversations. It didn't matter where you sat on a political issue, the Madisons wanted and had you at their dining room table. And that was both while he was president and after he retired. Madison's popularity didn't diminish after he retired as president of the United States. Arguably more people came and asked for his counsel after he retired and permanently moved back to Montpelier. He had prominent visitors such as Thomas Jefferson, like I said. The Marquis de Lafayette spent a lot of time at Montpelier. He was a frequent diner at James's table, James and Dolly's table. There's actually a Lafayette Tour Pomeroy sign at Montpelier. It was one of the first things I noticed. I loved it so much. So that was a fun little bit from home that I got. And also Andrew Jackson came to Montpelier to seek James Madison's counsel right before the end of Madison's life. So once again, he was someone who was respected and sought after even after his time in the political sphere had ended. So because of that, he was having a lot of different people at his dinner tables. And with the absolute powerhouse that was his wife, Dolly, of course, women and wives were invited as well. She was the kind of person who would walk around a dining table and have a copy of, like the most recent copy of the newspaper, just holding on to it or just casually dropping it somewhere so that it would spark the conversation that her and James wanted, and then it would go from there. So I'm sure all of you who are familiar with the Seward family have gone, wait a second, that sounds a lot like Seward and Anna, and it does exactly, and that's one of the things that made me so happy about this Madison and Seward connection, is I firmly believe that Dolly and her creation of, she's heralded with creating, quote unquote, the modern day first lady role. The hostess and the entertainer and the one who really does the schmoozing, kind of, I guess you could say. And so it's through part of her influence that we have Anna's absolutely spectacular dining hosting. Not to say that Anna was not a powerhouse entirely on her own, but of course, Dolly was the one that popularized this kind of thing, where all conversations were welcome at the Madison table. Slavery was something that was debated quite often. As you can imagine, as I mentioned, Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, and the Marquis de Lafayette were all visitors. They also had journalists, and anybody who was willing to make the trek to Montpelier, the Madisons would be more than happy to have you at their table and hear out what you have to say. So something very, very similar to the Sewards, which I think is, once again, so much fun. Something that I really, really enjoy learning about as I've been at Montpelier is exactly how loud the Marquis de Lafayette was when it came to issues against slavery. I just loved, because a lot of what you'll hear if you go on a tour of Montpelier is information on how people were constantly chirping in Madison's ear about certain things. And like I keep pointing out, slavery was a big thing. It was something that kept circulating back in his life. He did not, it really, really weighed heavily on his heart, the fact that he was someone who owned slaves. He was an enslaver. But that part of him felt that there was nothing he could do about it. Once again, Dolly, Anna, dining room diplomacy. They didn't call it dining room diplomacy, but I just love it. So one big quote that really stood out to me is, "Knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and a people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power knowledge gives." So reading that quote, to me, it kind of screams Seward. You would think, looking at that quote, that that's a Seward quote. It's from Madison. So just based off of Madison's words, you can kind of tell the influence, just by this sentence, I would say, that they had on Seward. Because when I read it, no joke, I thought this was a Seward quote at first. I did not think this was a Madison quote. This is a picture of Montpelier that we have down here. So Madison's encouragement of education and religious freedom really brought together his political career and highlighted the majority of what he did throughout his time in office. This connection with Seward also very much valued religious freedom and education. He worked with individuals across different faiths. For example, we have his work with Bishop John Hughes, as he worked with the Catholic Church in New York City to open up Catholic schools to more readily access education. And he also donated a set of books to every public school in New York State to help set up the public school library system. The books that he donated were of broad subjects, something that Madison would have encouraged. Madison's education himself was broad. Like I said, he learned about 7 languages. The final language he decided to pick up, just because he wanted to, was Hebrew. So that was the final language he learned. In the summer, right before he started college under John Witherspoon, he was a bit too sickly to return to Montpelier, so he figured he needed something to do, and that ended up being learning Hebrew. So both men had a lot of respect for those who did not necessarily agree with them. They encouraged viewpoints that they weren't necessarily their own, but just in general, Madison had a great respect for a lot of people, and I think that really, really influenced William Seward. While Seward he didn't consider himself a Madisonian through his entire existence, he was a man of the Constitution, is what Seward was ultimately, and Madison was the one who created the Constitution. Madison had a lot of faith in the document that he created, and he knew that it needed to be a working document, and that is how Seward viewed it as well. It was a working document that needed to be updated, that needed to be changed, and not only did that involve slavery, but also education and rights for everyone. Seward and Madison both encouraged the women in their lives to continue to be strong, educated people. Madison never discouraged Dolly from doing anything that she wanted to, really. At dinner parties, he didn't tell her to be quiet. He never told her that she couldn't dictate anything that happened at Montpelier. And that is very similar to the way that Seward kind of conducted his life with his wife and his children. James Madison didn't have any children. James and Dolly never had kids. Dolly had one son from a previous marriage. And so Madison never really got the opportunity to be a father that Seward could potentially model himself after, but it was the idea of Seward being always on the side of women. And while Madison wasn't the kind of person that was like, yeah, women's suffrage, let's do it, he wasn't the kind of person who would discourage it either. Madison was a great politician. Seward was a great politician. And I will close with thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate it. I know this wasn't the most professional lecture of all time, but hopefully it was fun and you got some laughs and got some smiles out of it. I'll be here if you have any questions. Thank you guys so much for coming.
I'm 14 or 15.
15.
When she started portraying Fanny Seward for our Christmas program. And I'm not going to embarrass you by saying how old you are now, but that was a number.
I will.
Oh my God. So she's literally the same age as my youngest child. And to watch her go from that sassy teenager to this professional woman we have standing before us, brings me to tears. I feel very emotional. It's so good to see all your family here. I think your presentation was amazing. I know almost nothing about Madison. I do know a little bit about Montpelier, and what I know about Madison, I know from Hamilton. That's not Madison. But anyway, thank you so much for being here. I enjoyed that. I love the through lines with Madison to Seward and how that must have really been modeled.
Thank you. Thank you, Billy.
How many times did they interact? Do you have, is there a record of that?
Seward and Madison?
Yes.
None that I know of. Yes. I know Seward was in Virginia at one point, and his time in Virginia is actually part of what influenced his heavy anti-slavery abolitionist beliefs, because he was able to see that kind of slavery firsthand, and it absolutely horrified him. But no.
Madison on this trip went through that area, pushing. Yeah.
Did Madison ever free his slaves when he was little or anything?
No, Madison never freed his slaves. Unlike Jefferson, who left his slaves, the enslaved individuals, to be freed in his will, Madison did not. The only thing he said in his will was that the enslaved on Montpelier were not to be sold against their wishes. Exactly. But unfortunately, that ended up happening anyway. Dolly ended up selling off the majority of the enslaved community to pay off various debts. By the time Madison died, the mid-Atlantic colonies were failing agriculturally. Tobacco had pretty much sucked the majority of the nutrients out of the soil, and we didn't know that much about crop rotation yet. Madison was one of the leading early voices advocating for crop rotation. But at that time, it was just the mid-Atlantic colonies were failing, and they couldn't sustain that many people.
Is he his dad like Thomas Jefferson?
Yes. Yeah.
Dolly continued on as the grand dame of Washington for quite a while. And I think I remember that Seward met her. He put it into one of his...
Yeah, they were in Washington at the same time, because Dolly's house, what it's called the Dolly Madison house today, is in that same strip that the clubhouse that the Sewards rented while he was Secretary of State is in. It's literally, I think, like 2 houses apart is Dolly's house. So they definitely overlapped in Washington, D.C. There's even, I believe, Dolly also met Abraham Lincoln at one point. Yeah. So yeah, she stayed in Washington for a very, very long time. She died in Washington, and then her body was later moved to Montpelier so she could be interred in the Madison family cemetery. Yeah, sorry.
Can you tell us more about how the 2/3 of a person evolved? Who came up with it?
The 2/3 compromise is something that it was their way of trying to include the enslaved population when it came to representation in government without actually making the enslaved population people, if that makes sense. I know, it doesn't really make sense. It's extremely complicated, but it was the South's way of trying to combat not having large populations, so therefore not having a lot of representation in government, was their inclusion of the enslaved population, but they didn't count as a whole person.
Who was the person in Congress that got that started?
The 2/3 compromise?
So the 3/5 compromise.
Yeah,
right?
3/5 compromise.
This takes us to the debate that were happening that Hamilton's really leading between he and, I said Hamilton, I meant Madison. He and Hamilton are having in the Federalist Papers about the Virginia Plan, which is Madison's more like Jeffersonian, smaller government, more hands-off and bigger, and all these compromises that we're going to stitch it together. Which led me to my question, if you don't mind, Alyssa. And again, it's so great to have you here. I love this reunion. You've learned so much about Madison. I don't know much either, but I think when I approached the idea of this talk from you, I thought Seward's coming of age politically meant he would come to reject his early Madisonian roots, of the Madison of the Virginia Plan, of smaller government, of these compromises that allowed slavery. But I think what you've suggested today is the alternative, that you see Seward not rejecting Madison, but there's some kernel of Madison that Seward found as a young man, maybe at Union College, that continued on the Seward of pro-education policies. Yeah. So I guess maybe my question was my premise wrong? Do you think Seward never really had to reject, I was a Madisonian, but like from that early, like something about James Madison, my father also told me I had to vote Democrat, but you see Seward really maybe maturing and developing as a Madisonian as opposed to having to reject that identity to become a Whig, a Republican, or something that I was seeing as an anti-Madisonian.
Yeah, as I was learning about James Madison throughout my time at Montpelier so far, I've only been there for 9 months, but I saw, the more I was learning about Madison, the more I was seeing Madison reflected in Seward, just because of the consistency with his desire for education and his religious freedoms and the complicated thoughts on slavery. I wouldn't say that he needed to totally reject Madison, or that he did totally reject Madison in order to become the Republican politician that he was. I think one of the remarkable things about Seward is that he was a culmination of the people around him and the people who influenced him. And so he was able to take the parts of being a Madisonian politician and turning that in and making it into how I become a Seward Republican, if that makes sense. Fucker!
Building off of Jeff, so Madison, we think of small government, right? But then he's a wartime president. Tell me about what his relationship to quote unquote big government was. What did his views evolve? Whatever you can, sorry.
No, so, I mean, the War of 1812 wasn't the most popular thing. There were a lot of issues leading up to it, and I mean, Madison's abandoning of Washington, D.C. was not everybody's most favorite thing. The British came marching through, and he kind of skedaddled. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if necessarily him being a wartime president like massively impacted his thoughts on big government or not. That's not something I'm too familiar with. But no, questions. And it's a good thing that you're asking because now I can figure it out. I'm the kind of person, I like learning every day. So yeah, War of 1812 is not popular. He himself was not popular for abandoning Washington, D.C. I mean, the most iconic thing we get out of it is Dolly Madison salvaging some, yes, absolutely. And actually, it wasn't even Dolly. It was one of the enslaved people that they had brought from Montpelier. His name was Paul Jennings.
Yeah, Paul.
Yes. If you are interested at all in a really interesting slave narrative, Paul Jennings, he wrote a memoir called A Slave in the White House, is literally what it's called. Yes, you do. So they are his words about his time in the White House as a member of the enslaved population under James Madison. It's a really, really interesting book. It's like I said, it's his words. Jennings taught himself how to read. He actually he emancipated himself by the end of his life. He was a free man and was able to actually give Dolly loans. He was in a better financial situation at some points in his life than Dolly was. And we have a letter of him giving Dolly at least one loan. So, yeah. I turned your question into a comment about Paul Jennings. So, yes.
So, can you connect it up? First of all, welcome back. And it's a beautiful home. I was there a couple of years ago, and you guys do a great job about slavery on that property. But can you connect the dots of how he went from not part of the Declaration of Independence and actively to being so involved in the Constitution?
So he ended up in Williamsburg, and that was the capital of Virginia at the time. He was a part of the Congress in Virginia. And he ended up making a bunch of the right friends. He helped George Mason do a lot with the Virginia Constitution, including the addition of a clause for religious freedom. He ended up making a lot of the right friends and ended up in Philadelphia. It was actually Aaron Burr that brought him up to Philadelphia. Ironically enough. And it was also Aaron Burr that introduced him to Dolly. Dolly was living in Philadelphia. So he was friends with Thomas Jefferson. He had the basic political knowledge, and also he was someone who, kind of like Seward, he was loud and he didn't want you to forget that he was there. So the phrase great little Madison applies in multiple ways because he was, like I said, that kind of person who's going to be like, no, you're not going to forget that I'm here. I have things to say. I have contributions to make. And so he was elected to the Constitutional Convention. And that is where he became, quote unquote, the father of the Constitution. He locked himself in his upper study in Montpelier for weeks, months, studying every single kind of government you could possibly find and figure out what went wrong, what their flaws were, and how he can create a document that does not include those flaws. And that was partially helped by books sent over from Jefferson from France. He had to bug him a couple of times to get the books sent over. Originally, Jefferson was like, just use what's in my library. But Madison went, no, you don't have enough in your library. Kind of wild to say that to Thomas Jefferson. You don't have what I need in your library. So Jefferson ended up sending over more books from France. And Madison just immersed himself in the idea of self-government and how he could set the country best up for success. So he became, he was the constitutional authority. And so he was someone that people very much looked to even before the Constitution was finished. They knew what he'd contributed and exactly the research that had gone into the creation of this document. Did that answer your question? He was very...
All of his books, though.
So after,
A great display there.
so Montpelier did not stay in Madison hands. Montpelier went through a few different owners before it was purchased by the DuPont family in 1901. It was one of their summer estates, because why not have multiple? But over the course of the almost 100 years between when Madison passed away and when the DuPonts purchased the house, things were sold off and given away and all that kind of stuff. The museum is slowly, acquiring some stuff back, but it's a lot of like replicas and books that Madison might have had, but a lot of them are, unfortunately, they have been lost to the ether.
Hi, John. Hi. This was fabulous. Thank you. Is the museum doing anything with engaging descendants of formerly enslaved people? Like, I know Jefferson's house has done that. Is there any kind of community efforts around that with Montpelier?
Yes. So on just speaking from my own experience, one of the things that drew me to working at Montpelier to begin with was their work with their descendants of the enslaved community. They have the Montpelier Descendants Society, which not only includes people who have traceable roots to their ancestors being enslaved at Montpelier, but also people who have traceable roots for their family being enslaved in the general area of Montpelier and Orange County. So they have restored a freeman's cabin, one of the last remaining freeman cabins in the United States. It was owned by a man named George Gilmore. He was formerly enslaved at Montpelier, and he purchased the land, built the house, is a freeman's cabin, and his descendants are still very actively involved at the site. We love the Gilmore descendants. We love the entire Montpelier descendant community. Like I said, that was something that really drew me to Montpelier to begin with, was how open they were to the education of the fact that slavery did happen on the site, and here's what we're doing about it, and here's how we're giving back.
Thank you.
I have a two-part question.
Okay.
First of all, was Madison a classicist like Jefferson, like ancient Rome, Greece?
Yeah. Yes, they all were.
Yeah.
They all were. There's multiple busts throughout Montpelier of Madison and his general circle in a very Romanesque style. Yes, like similarly to how we have a couple of Roman style busts of Seward here. So it's very, the founders were very classically inspired. They were inspired by ancient Rome, and yeah.
And then my other question was, when I think of the founding fathers, I think of Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, Hamilton. Those are like the first ones that come to mind. I don't think of Madison. I mean, he obviously was crucial to the Constitution and setting up the government. He was one of the first presidents. For some reason, he doesn't come to mind as really as even like John Adams. And like, do you think? But Dolly Madison, I think of her right away. Is there maybe a reason that he's more in the background, maybe, or is it?
I think because the term founding father is so closely associated with the men that were there and signed the Declaration of Independence that sometimes we forget that there were other people involved in the creation of our government. So, for example, Madison, extremely influential, but he doesn't come in until a little bit later. So, like, for example, we're celebrating the 250th, but we're not celebrating right now, we're not celebrating the 250th of the Constitution, we're celebrating the 250th of the Declaration of Independence. So they are two separate removed documents that, well, people consider them to be two separate removed documents and kind of like view them as they happened in two different times, I think. But yeah, the term founding father is typically associated with the people who were there, signed the Declaration of Independence, and also George Washington, because he was the first president. Walker!
You said that Jefferson and Madison were pals, and Jefferson was kind of pestering Madison.
Yes.
Did Jefferson ever try to backseat drive his presidency, like Madison's presidency?
Not that I know of. He just tried to backseat drive like how Madison designed his house and the kinds of books that he has. If you look at the front of Montpelier and you look at the front of Monticello, they are extremely similar looking buildings. And that is because of the Jeffersonian influence. It was very much, his influence was more like in Madison's private life with, no, you don't need me to send you books. You can just look through my place at Monticello, I don't care. You could,
What does Montpelier mean?
House on a hill, I think. The name itself was not, like Madison, his father nor his grandfather, none of them gave the name Montpelier to Montpelier. It was somebody visiting wrote that it was a lovely house on a hill and then said something, it's a French word, Montpelier is French. And then it just ended up sticking. That's not the name that Madison necessarily gave.
Was he close to this? He had Scottish background, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did that influence him in any way with, looking at what the British were and how the war turned out?
Well, he definitely, like I said, he was definitely a child of the Scottish Enlightenment. He was very heavily influenced by John Witherspoon, who was a reverend. I can imagine that some kind of just generational issue with the British had something to do with his desire to help create a nation, but it was mostly he was along the same lines as, we can't deal with being under the British anymore, the taxation without representation kind of thing. He wanted us to be our own people and to found our own government, and the king wasn't doing it.
But he didn't participate very much at that point.
No, he was at that point he was too young to actually go and fight in the war or anything like that. And also the first two S's that I mentioned before, small and sickly. He potentially had epilepsy. We're not too sure. I haven't seen anything that's definitively said what ailed Madison, but he was sickly throughout the majority of his life, and so that inhibited him from doing a lot, and that's why he dove so much into education and just learning as much as he possibly could.
Who was his vice president?
His vice president, do you know off the top of your head?
Okay,
George Clinton? Was it George Clinton?
Daniel Tompkins?
Was it? Maybe it was.
It was George Clinton.
And Elbridge Gerry.
we all remember him.
1809 to 1812, 1814 to 1817 was Elbridge Gerry.
George Clinton.
1809 to 1812.
Banner day for guessing.
Was he connected with Monroe and all?
They were close. Monroe and Madison, it's kind of funny. When Madison passed away, by the time he passed, Jefferson, Adams, and Monroe had all died on the 4th of July. Jefferson and Adams were on the same 4th of July, but Monroe was on a different one. So Madison's physician actually asked him if he wanted to, because the physician would have given him some kind of concoction that would have knocked him out, but he would have lasted a little bit longer. It was opium related, and the physician was literally like, "Do you want to die on the 4th? I can arrange that."
But by extending, not shortening.
Exactly, yes, extending, yeah, no. So literally his physician was like, you wanna do the same thing? We can keep the ball rolling because we'll have 2, 3, 4, and 5. It'll be great. No. But he didn't want to lose his mental capacity. Despite the fact that his body deteriorated rapidly when he was at the end of his life, his mind remained sharp, just like Seward. And his last words were actually to his niece, because he just kind of sat in bed, and his niece goes, "Uncle Jemmy, is there anything wrong?" He goes, "Nothing, just a simple change of mind, my dear." And then he passed away. Yeah.
Interesting. And deserves not all us.
I know. It's like, what do you change it? What? He passed away it was before the 4th of July. I wanna get the date correct. Yes, June 28th of 1836. Yes, I was right. He died at the end of June. So literally, his doctor was like, I can do this to you. I can do this for you. You want to die on the 4th? I can do this for you. Because it was at the end of June. But. Yes, presidents die. Early presidents dying on the 4th of July was just apparently a trend.
Yes, I think maybe one more question in the bag.
Yes.
Yeah, was there any relationship between Dolly Madison and Abigail Adams?
I'm sure they ran together in similar circles, but I haven't come across anything specifically that said that Dolly and Abigail were hanging out together in Washington, D.C., or they were spending time specifically together. But I'm sure they were both in Philadelphia at the same time, and they had mutual friends. So there's a really good chance that they did spend time together, but I don't know personally of any specific instances.
Did they write letters at all, or between the two of them?
Not that I know of. I have not been able to find a database for Madison like the Seward House has, the Seward Project. So if you're not familiar, the Seward Project is a fantastic resource that's at the University of Rochester, where they are transcribing and digitizing all of the Seward correspondence. So if you can literally just go in and like keyword search for anything. So unfortunately, I have not come across something like that for Madison. So I'm not sure of any specific instances.
Something for you to do.
I know. That would be, I know. No, I know, seriously. I'll start bugging our education and interpretation department, please.
Can we have another round of applause for Alyssa Morris? Come back home. Don't go away.